This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
End of the day, humans need to know they matter. And if they matter, then they feel that they are being seen. They do feel that there is safety and there's security, and they're more likely to feel a part of something versus just feeling like people are taking from them, right? That's where that burnout comes from. I have to produce, and eventually there's just no more left in the tank.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky, and today we have another episode in our series, Wellness at Work, Nurturing Resilience. My guest today is Kamini Wood. She's a certified life coach and is passionate about working with high achievers to heal their relationships with themselves. We talked about becoming emotionally resilient as a leader and the impact that can have on the organization. We talked about how to achieve that and some of the barriers to getting there. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Hi, Kamini. I'm so excited that we're finally getting to record this episode.
I'm excited to be here. It's going to be good.
Yes. And before we start talking about wellness at work and resilience, I want to start out with my question. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Well, there are many historical figures that I would want to have a meal with just to learn from them and gain knowledge from them. But the person that I actually would love to be able to sit down and have a meal with once again would be my maternal grandfather, because he always would drop these nuggets of wisdom and I didn't quite understand what they meant. And as I've been getting older and going through my own growth process, so many of those nuggets make more sense. And I would love to be able to actually converse with him about them from the place I am today versus when he dropped them on me to begin with.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And I'm already thinking of a bunch of people in my life that would fit that description too. I wish I could make it happen. I say that every time, but I so wish I could make these happen because I can see the value they would bring to your life, to everyone's life as we talk about this question. So thank you for sharing that. I wish I could make it happen for you. So we are here to talk about wellness at work and how that fits in with resilience. And you and I were talking about how leaders can become emotionally resilient as the topic for our conversation. So just big picture, what would that look like and why would that be of value to an organization for a leader to be emotionally resilient?
So what does it look like? It looks like really building up first of all, their emotional intelligence, understanding what's happening for me in terms of what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing from an emotional standpoint. Emotional intelligence also allows room to understand what other people might be feeling or experiencing. And the reason why emotional resilience is so important in terms of leadership and to companies is because we are going to go through so many different stressors and challenges as we're trying to run our companies, lead our teams, whatever the situation may be, because at the end of the day, businesses are in it for profitability. Mm-hmm. However, the reason why this is so important is because if we don't pay attention to what's happening to us as leaders emotionally, it makes it more difficult to then be able to lead because we don't know what's coming up for us. So therefore, we're not able to maybe handle the stress that we're undergoing or experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, we're going to show up in a less than ideal way trying to lead our teams.
Mm-hmm.
The best example I can give is even of a parent, right? When a parent is completely overstimulated by something that is stressing them out, the way that they communicate to their children is completely different than if they're regulated and they know what they're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the same thing applies in leadership roles in a company. Is we have to start asking our leaders to pay attention to what's going on emotionally, build up that resilience so that they can then lead their teams from that place of emotional intelligence. Because at the end of the day, and you and I've talked about this, we aren't human doings, we're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can see our team members as a human being, that is what will actually allow our teams to be successful and to move companies forward.
Yes, I love that phrase that we aren't human doings, we are human beings. And as you were saying that, I'm so curious. This is something that I feel like organizations are starting to pay more attention to, whether it was the pandemic that kind of brought out mental health, or we're just slowly moving in this direction. What is preventing organizations from moving in this direction, to really having leaders be resilient and think about the mental wellness of themselves and their teams?
I think it could be a couple of different things. Like, first of all, it's been normalized not to, right? It's kind of the state of how it's always been, and going against what's been normalized or what we've been conditioned to, that can be difficult because it's changed, it's different. But I also think that in our effort to be productive, to produce, there might also be a fear of, if I take the time to slow down and pay attention to this, I'm going to lose time. I'm not going to be as productive.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had this in conversations with people where if they have 2 hours and you're asking them to take 10 minutes to practice mindfulness or practice breathing in order to regulate their nervous system, the response has been that I'm losing 10 minutes and I'm going to lose that productivity time. And so I think that's the challenge that we're facing, is recognizing, though, as businesses and companies, taking that 10 minutes will actually allow for the rest of the 50 minutes, whatever the time is, to be more productive. Because if we don't take that 10 minutes, it's an opportunity cost at the end of the day. But I do think that companies have to get, that shift has to happen where they're seeing this as an investment that will actually they'll have a return on the investment, versus if they don't put the investment in, they're spinning their wheels. They're not getting as much out of it as they could.
Yes. And listeners, what you could not see, since this is an audio only podcast, is I was jumping up and down when she was saying this, that sometimes taking the time to step away, go for a walk, quick walk, do mindfulness, whatever the practice is, but just take yourself out of that environment is actually the most productive thing you can do. Why is it so hard for us sometimes to recognize that or actually do it?
I do think that it's, again, we go back to like conditioned behavior. Nope, I got to just do this. I got to figure it out. It's like the math problem that we couldn't solve, and we just kept sitting there, pulling our hair out, scratching the, paper. No, I can't. I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to give up until I figure it out. I'm going to push through this. Instead, though, had we given ourselves permission to step up, maybe go for a walk or go pet the dog or feed the cat, whatever the thing may have been, and then come back and sat down, we would have had a fresh mindset. We would have been able to sit down. And I know this, being a parent, I have often seen this happen with my kids where they're getting so stressed out, and I actually encourage them to step away from it. And 10 minutes later, whatever it is that they were struggling with makes so much more sense. But we fight it. We fight it because fear of lost time, fear of not being productive, and then fear of just, I need to figure this out. I can figure this out. I need to just push through it. That's a big mentality that we've got to shift to. Instead of pushing through, that's part of this emotional resilience. Instead of pushing through, name the emotions, pay attention to what's coming up. And then the really important question is, okay, now that I know that I'm feeling this way, what do I need?
Mm-hmm.
Figure out what you need. When that gets dealt with, now we can shift and deal with whatever the challenge or stress is.
Yes, is what I want to say to that. So, when we're talking about leaders needing to be emotionally resilient, how does that trickle down to the team or even to the bottom line?
Well, as leaders become emotionally resilient, a couple things are happening. One, they're showing up in a more grounded place as they're leading their team because they're aware of what's going on for them emotionally. They're able to access what it is that they need. They address it, and then they can communicate from that place to their team. As they're showing up and doing that, they're creating space for their team to also do the same thing, right? Because they're now making it safe to recognize that emotions actually matter.
Mm.
We pay attention to them. We make room for them. We don't let them drive the bus, but we allow them to be information packets to give us information on what it is that we need. And as we do that, we're empowering the team members. All of that allows for less burnout, more commitment to actually the work that they're doing, more investment in terms of time and energy. All of that is going to contribute to a better bottom line. Yeah. Because everybody's invested versus being completely burnt out. People are going to tap out. They're not going to. We see turnover so high in the areas where we're not paying attention to things like this, right? Because at some point people tap out. They can't consistently keep pushing forward and pushing forward.
Yes. I have been reading about burnout recently. That's just been as the keyword on my mind recently, and how organizations are thinking actively about ways how to prevent burnout, minimize its impact, all of that stuff. I like thinking the connection between having a resilient leader and resiliency in general and preventing burnout. Because I think you're right. You mentioned earlier, we're sort of that go, go, go human doing. And we have expected ourselves in the work environment to be different people than we are outside of the work environment, I think.
Yeah. In the work environment, it's almost as if we're expected to never feel and to just continue to push through. I do think some of us struggle, right? We might take that out into our personal world where we don't really give ourselves permission to feel. But for the most part, I think we go into work and we put on that mask of I am a human doing. I need to go produce. This is my job. But we know that burnout isn't just having too much on our plate. It includes things like lack of community, not feeling like you're part of that group of people, not feeling like you're rewarded or seen. Dan Siegel talks about the 4 S's in terms of parenting, in terms of being able to soothe, see, create security and safety, right? That's true in all relationships. I find that that's even true in the work environment. As our leaders are able to provide those 4 S's for their team members, those are the qualities that go into fighting against things like burnout. Because at the end of the day, humans need to know they matter. And if they matter, then they feel that they are being seen. They do feel that there is safety in their security, and they're more likely to feel a part of something versus just feeling like people are taking from them, right? That's where that burnout comes from. I have to produce, and eventually there's just no more left in it.
Right. You know, I had somebody that I know say to me, my company doesn't care about this stuff. They don't think about mental health in the workplace. They just they're never going to invest in something like that. And that really scares me as a place for all of that community where all of those people are now seen as somehow, disposable, or I'm not even sure what the term is.
Replaceable almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's actually quite scary that there are companies and individuals who don't see the importance of things like this, because at the end of the day, if we don't pay attention to these things, what we're expecting from those employees just can't happen. It's eventually they run out of the steam in order to produce what we want them to produce.
Right. And what role do you think the stigma about mental health issues plays in these companies or individuals who don't want to be thinking about resilience and emotional health?
I love that question. I hate to make generalizations. However, I do think that we're starting to see a generation situation happening here, right? Like we're seeing where different generations are treating it differently. And what I mean by that is, I know that my children's generation, there's still a stigma attached to some of it. Mm-hmm. However, it is far less than what I dealt with when I was their age. Mm-hmm. And I do think that we're seeing that in companies too. The companies that are steadfast and not wanting to talk about this tend to be more of that coming from an older generation, perhaps, in terms of these are things that we don't talk about. These are things kept behind closed doors. We keep these things, at home. We don't air our dirty laundry versus, people who maybe younger type companies, maybe companies that have emerged more recently might have a different viewpoint on what it means and why it is so important to be paying attention to mental health, why we need to be talking about these things and that it's not a bad thing to talk about. So while again, I don't like to make generalizations because I also do think that there are plenty of people who might be part of an older generation that are also working really hard to reduce the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that's where the divide, we're still seeing it in companies based on what I've seen and the conversations I've been having. Because I know I go in and do speaking engagements for different companies on exactly these topics like emotional resilience. And it's very interesting to see which companies are really embracing it and which companies kind of say, no, we don't really want to talk on that. Instead, we want to talk on productivity and time management.
Right.
Which is not bad. It's not bad at all to talk about those things, but it's can we make room for both to be in the room?
Right. We're talking about leaders within organizations and pretty broadly defined. What role does the organization itself have in helping leaders become resilient and in building that culture and environment that's supportive of that?
I think that organizations have a really important role in that because, again, as leaders become emotionally resilient and they affect their team members, organizations affect the leaders, right? Creating space to build, like I said, workshops on emotional resilience, providing an environment where we're encouraging leaders to learn about these things and to talk about these things and reducing the stigma. That's the role that the organization plays in it because it's encouraging their leaders and their emerging leaders to make this a priority and make this a priority, not just for the profit and the bottom line of the company, but for the wellness of the entire organization, because that's what's going to keep the organization going for the long term.
Right. And I feel like often we're kind of caught between that short-term and long-term thinking. Feels good right now, or what do we just need to deal with right now versus making small, perhaps, or big changes for reward in the future.
No, and such a great point, because I do think also this goes back to what we were talking about before, where it's, well, I don't want to take these, 10 minutes of the day because they won't be productive, but it's short term, right? But long-term gain. It's kind of the same thing, making these smaller changes, they'll compound to make the larger changes over the long haul. And that's really what we're looking towards. That it's not like you have to go in and make this huge sweeping change, but starting to have these conversations, starting to encourage people to allow room for building emotional resilience, paying attention to what is your stress level today? What are you feeling? What do you need? Just even small things like that in our leadership. Now we're building that with our leaders, and then they're going to take that. It's going to trickle down towards all the teams as well.
Right. Absolutely. And going back to what you were saying about the generations, which of course is a generalization, and we know that generations aren't even a real demographic group, but as we're thinking about different age groups,
yeah,
I do see it as well that younger folks are sort of just assuming that we're going to be paying attention to mental health in the organization. And not that I want to say that young people are going to save us, but I do appreciate that we are making enough change that there are people who expect it as the norm.
Yes. Yeah. It's shifting the normalized conditioned behavior, right? Yeah.
Which is what I wanted when I started this. So I know we're moving in that direction. So, thinking about the organization as a whole and the leader's role in the organization, what are some steps to do to really make sure they're building a culture of wellness and mental health in the organization, in a way that feels right for them?
I think that's such a great question, because what you just said right there is it has to feel right for them. So I don't think that there's a one size fits all for this. I think that there's many different ways that organizations can implement these things and to offer pathways to start bringing this into their culture. Some of it, for some individuals and for some individual corporations, it is about bringing in and talking about through workshops or lunch and learns about certain topics, which again, at the beginning may not have a huge showing, but as you start to make that more normalized, people will start to buy into it.
Mhm.
But that's a great way to not individualize or not to pull somebody out as like, you need to work on your emotional resilience, but it's more of a culturally wide thing that we're talking about,
Yes.
right? That can be done through, again, workshops, presentations, lunch and learns. I know many corporations started instituting like wellness newsletters for their employees. And so you're starting to bring in topics just around wellness and emotional health and mental well-being. So it's not just the conversation moves from not just about productivity and bottom line and profitability, which are all important. I'm not disputing that, but we're expanding the conversation across
Mhm.
the board. And really, ultimately, if I were to sort of give like the what could they do, it is start talking about it, start conversing, start bringing these things into the forefront.
Yes. It just made me think. I think a lot of us have had this experience, especially when we're younger professionals, having this idea and you say it out loud and no one in the room thinks it's a good idea. They either literally don't even respond to you or they sort of poo-poo you. And then 2 months later, somebody of a probably different demographic than you says the exact same thing. And everyone says, that's the greatest idea we have ever heard. And I'm hearing what you're saying is we're a little bit just building that in. We're having those conversations. So the more times you hear it, it starts to be, then somebody will say the idea and you've heard it enough that it feels like a good idea.
Yes, yes, because it doesn't feel it's so different or so off the mark, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like when you tell your children something over and over and over again, and then suddenly they repeat it back to you like it was just their idea, and you think to yourself, where did you get that from?
Right.
It's kind of the same concept.
Whether it's kids or whether it's in your organization, you have to be communicating that is a great idea. Not, are you kidding me?
Exactly.
I told you this 2 months ago.
Exactly. I love that idea. Wonderful. How do we go about implementing it?
Just picturing the kids in my life. Yes, I know. So as we're getting close to the time to end, but I was recently reading about employee assistance programs and how they're not actually very well used. It's very small percentage. I want to say almost less than 10% of utilization for a lot of these, and that's a generalization. And organizations have a lot of programs like the
Mhm.
EAPs and others. And I'm curious, how do you see those fitting in or not fitting in to leaders being resilient and the organization being resilient?
I think that those could actually be really, really beneficial. I think the ones that I've had experience with, and I'm actually utilizing my experience, what I'm saying experience with is talking to my own clients about the employee programs that their employers offer.
Mhm.
And their reflection to me is it's too small, meaning it's almost taken like a checkbox approach where it's like, we have this employee assistance program, but there hasn't been enough put into it. For instance, they might have like one person that they can contact for assistance with maybe working through some, mental health / emotional health things, right?
Mhm.
Versus having maybe a directory of people so the employees feel empowered to find somebody that actually matches what it
Mhm.
is that they need and it's a good fit.
Mhm.
So that would be an example of, yes, the concept is great, but instead of it just being more of a checkbox, like we have this, it's put the time and effort into actually offering it on a wider range, right? So if you're going to have somebody that people can talk to, have a few different people within that group so that people can really get to know who's there and find the fit for them. If you're going to have workshops, allow for different types of workshops, right? Not just one or two. And I know that that takes an investment of time and effort and money at the end of the day, but those are the things that we're talking about. Like if we're going to put an employee assistance program in place, make it count.
Right.
I know, personal opinion on that one.
No, I appreciate it. And I think what might seem like a challenge to folks is something we've kind of been talking through this whole thread is that the real way to build this culture and be supportive is individual. So we're not all going to want to talk to the same type of person in your example of the EAP. And So as you said, having the checkbox of we have this person to talk to, that might work for you. It might not work for me. And I'm wondering if there's fear. Well, how big does this program or service or thing that we're offering have to be if everybody has a different idea of what's useful?
Right. To that point, though, you're not going to be able to maybe make everybody happy, right? But it's how do you find the middle ground versus so instead, like to my example, instead of having one person that everybody contacts, have a directory of people, or at least refer them to here are some people that you potentially could contact, or this is a program that we've heard. It's about partnering and figuring out who are the best partners. But to your original point too, I do think that fear plays a part in this is I'm scared that this is going to get too big and I don't want my whole business to be around running an EAP, for example.
Right.
And so it is about this balance of finding, what works for the business, first of all, and also having some boundaries around it. Like it can't be a boundaryless opportunity. Like we have an employee assistance program. We're just going to keep adding stuff, but having some idea of what is the purpose of it and then making sure that you're at least offering things within that purpose.
Absolutely. Well, Kamini, we're getting close to the end of our time. And just to wrap up, what is giving you hope when you're thinking about leaders and resilience and organizations?
The thing that's giving me hope, and this goes to your question about the stigma, is I'm very hopeful based on the fact that people seem much more willing to talk about these things, much more willing to start a conversation. Because I do believe that the more we talk about it, I talk about this even in my coaching, is the way we work through shame is we have to start talking about the thing that we've been shaming ourselves with. It's the way we get to that unshaming process. I believe this is another example of this is something we need to start talking about. And the more we talk about it, that's how we're going to shift and change some of these conditioned behaviors.
Right. Absolutely. All right. You heard it here first, everyone. Kamini, thank you so much. Tell our listeners how they can reach you if they want to learn more about you and your work.
I am on the web at kaminiwood.com and then Facebook and Instagram with the handle It's Authentic Me.
Oh, I love it. I will put links to those in the show notes so to make it easier for people to find you. And thank you so much for this conversation. It's been eye-opening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.